All right, hello. That's a little askew. So, my original plan was I was going to read 2 chapters today, but because this thing is really bugging me, I'm going to do one, and then I'll do another one tomorrow at some point during the day, maybe at night, which will actually catch us back up because I missed yesterday because my eye was swollen enough that it was bothering me. Anybody that's concerned, it's fine. It's not a big deal. It's like a minor sty inside of my eyelid that's just has made it really difficult to sleep and really difficult to read or do anything functional with the eye. Even having said that, though, I've written quite a bit in the last few days just by kind of shutting one eye and typing, which works, I guess. So I'm going to probably tweet out I'll tweet and I'll post it to the Facebook page, like an update about how many words of book 3 are done at this point of that first draft. The kind of scary thing for me right now is that I have if I was going to guess, I think I've got upwards of 150,000, and I haven't even written 2 of the major plot lines, nor have I gotten into the third act of the book. So I think it's going to be long. It might be longer than The Shield, which was 200 and I'd have to look it back up. It was long. So The Sword was like 220, and I think The Shield was 250,000 words. And it feels like this is going to be longer, but I really don't know because I'm not shooting for word count. I'm just trying to get to the point where the story's done. And also, it's the first draft. I may end up taking a bunch of things out or shifting things around, which could change quite a bit. So, anyway, today's chapter is going to be 23. It's going to take us back to Edge, Romand, and Raymere in the north. It'll also bring us into Anglo-Deus for a brief moment to kind of get back to that group after they've escaped the dungeons. And then we'll be picking up 24, and 24 will be a continuation of what's happening in Anglo-Deus. You're not going to really get... Well, you'll see a little bit of the Delmore group when we get back to 24, but it's going to be a little bit of time before we sort of circle back to Ghost Trem and all the things that happened in that chapter in the fight at Delmore. I think I'm going to save... I was going to talk a little bit about the reading and that scene in general, but I'm going to save that for after I finish chapter 23 today. So I'll read first, and then if you want to cut out of the video at that point, whether you're on YouTube or if you're listening to it later, I'm going to discuss that Delmore scene a little bit because there's some what might be interesting tidbits for people to share about sort of writing process. Holly Conrad, who I don't know if anybody follows her or knows who she is on, I just follow her on Twitter, and I've seen her do live Dungeons & Dragons games, put out a tweet today that got me thinking, which was about how she tried to write fantasy in college and was told that she couldn't write it, and now she basically gets paid to play Dungeons & Dragons. I responded by mentioning that where I went to school, I was told that I couldn't join the creative writing program as a freshman because freshmen weren't ready, and they wouldn't accept me. And so I never joined the creative writing program, and instead I did history and English lit, which I actually think was better for me in terms of writing. And now I've, put out 2 books, and I'm working on a third one, so it worked out fine for me. Seems to have worked out even better for her. But it got me thinking about where we start our processes in writing and other creative stuff. And I have a friend from the Penny Arcade Discord who does a lot of sketch work, and his drawings are progressively improving, and just finding the satisfaction in actually doing something that you like and then watching it get better is something that I believe really strongly in as an important part of everybody's life, regardless of what it is that you do. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But I'll read first. I need a drink. It's still hot. So chapter 23. In the young days of Teth-Tinir, the great northern waste was a more fruitful place, and consequently had a less foreboding name. In the early years of the plant's long life, it had been a more temperate region with many deep valleys of often fallow fields. In those days, there had been more inhabitants who had settled there, spending time upon the surface and within the mountains, farming and mining for their living. Beneath the earth they had delved and worked great tombs for their lords, as well as wondrous homes for living in the mountainsides. It was said by Northerners that from these first people the dwarves had come, but the Elves of Silverleaf argued that they were those early northern people, and the dwarves merely copied their old and vulgar habits of altering the nature of mountainous stone. The dwarves themselves refute both accounts and have their own story of their origins. The land was thus once and was not so anymore. Where Edge and Roman laid Remer down, there had once been a plateau of gardens belonging to the first people in the north, and now they found only mounds of snow. What was once the Great Northern Waste now went by the name of the Frozen Reach, and the border between the two was unclear, but by design neither name was especially inviting. The mountains extended out and above their position so that Edge thought he could see only rock around him on all sides. And though there might be nothing but cliffs left in all the as though there might not he could see only rock around him on all sides, and thought there might be nothing but cliffs left in all the land. Roman, who had never been this far north, not even passing by as Edge had, was similarly mesmerized. The two men sat, weary and cold, watching the great expanse about them and marveling at the sheer emptiness of the land. They had climbed for an entire day while sharing the burden of Raymir's sleeping form. She had roused briefly while they rested at the lower level of Mount Iceblade, but had fallen back into a deep slumber. She seemed to be breathing easily now, which was more than could be said for her companions. Roman remained standing, looking about as he sucked in the chilled air in deep gulps. Edge had collapsed in a heap beside Raymir. He had carried her most of the way in the past few hours, allowing Roman to break the deep snow before them as they went. She stirred slightly and her eyes fluttered open, but closed again and her body relaxed. Edge patted her hair back gently and watched as Roman looked about. "What are you expecting to find?" "I expect to find nothing," the older man grinned ruefully, "but I am hoping to find some wood before it gets too dark." Edge picked up his head. "Try over there. I see something sticking out of the snow. It could be a tree." Roman shrugged. "I hope it's a nice country cottage, but I suppose a tree would suffice." Edge laughed as Roman moved stiffly away from them. Raymir stirred again, and this time her head came up slowly. "Edge?" He turned his brilliant green eyes on her and smiled. "I'm here, love. How are you feeling?" Raymir rubbed her eyes. "Quite tired still. Where are we?" "We're climbing. Mount Iceblade. We're a little halfway up the rock." "How long have I been asleep?" Edge pulled her close. "Don't you worry about that. You saved Roman and me with your magic, but I think you may have overexerted yourself." "Yes," Raymir felt consciousness coming back to her. "I only remember fear for you, and crying aloud words I read in one of Sultane's books, and suddenly I was knocked flat." "Roman said the spell was beyond your power to cast. What you did out of desire to protect us." His face grew solemn. "I was just afraid you might not recover from it." Raymir smiled weakly. "It's the cost of magic. You have to give a piece of yourself for a time, though it will come back. I just need to rest a while longer." Edge nodded, though his eyes still shone with concern. "You may rest as much as you can. I carried you from the battle and up Iceblade this far. I can manage a bit farther." Raymir rubbed his cheek gently. "I think it's time another of us rested. Sleep, love. I'm here to watch you." Edge seemed about to resist, but his body cried out for respite, so he accepted the offer. As he settled down in the snow, Raymir helped him burrow in for warmth and threw a worn travel blanket atop his armored body. Edge looked at her, his eyes struggling to remain open. Roman went to find wood. He should be back soon. Edge drifted off in complete and total exhaustion. Raymir watched him for a while and then kept a wary eye about her for Roman or any other guest. Before long, a shape emerged before her in the thick, slowly falling snow. Roman was carrying a collection of miraculously dry dead branches in his arms. Raymir laughed at the sight of him, for his hair had gone from a silvery gray to a great cap of pure cotton white, and he had acquired a mustache in his travels. Roman was caught a little off guard by the sound, but he soon realized his comical appearance and dropped the kindling to brush the snow aside. He shrugged and laughed as well, happy to see Raymir was awake and apparently healthy as ever. The two quieted and went to work making the wood into a small, comforting fire. Roman spoke slowly with her as they did, recounting the journey up the mountain and the final fight with Kurok after Raymir had collapsed. When the fire was ready, Raymir finally noticed a gnawing hunger in her belly, which Roman was quick to insist on quelling. He gave her a double share of food, including most of his own, and after eating she found the weariness in her was gone and she was ready to move, but clearly Edge was going nowhere for a time. Roman lounged in the snow, watching it fall from the sky above him with a small smile. Raymir studied him and saw the care lines in his face and the battered look of his clothes, yet something in him made him seem to shine before her, like a wondrous lord of some ancient kingdom. She had suspected since he first revealed himself that Roman was more than he let on. Now watching him recline on the mountainside, she was certain of it. He held himself in an air of power and command that he had projected calmly throughout the journey. He reminded her suddenly of Algathor. "Roman," she asked softly, "tell me about your home. I've never been to Hethagar." The old man eyed her with a small smile and sighed. My home. That's not an easy thing you ask me to explain, but I can try." He seemed to fumble for the right words, speaking in generalities and half measures. "It's mostly logging and hunting, you know. We have our big wooden homes, warm fires, long days. Work is life in Hethagar, like most of the north. Labor keeps you fed, keeps you safe." As he moved from vague descriptions of the town to things more personal, she sensed him perking up slightly. "I have a wife, and a son as well. He's around your age, I think. though I've not seen either of them for some time. She's older than me, but the most beautiful woman you've ever seen, and wise. Certainly her patience and logic keep me in check. My son's more like me, rash and daring. Raymir shifted in the snow and spoke again. I'd dearly love to see your home, Romand. Roman's eyes met hers and at the same time seemed far away. Perhaps, my dear, we'll all go there one day when this deed is done. You will be my guests, and I can repay you for your kindness and faith on this quest of ours. Raymir studied him a moment before asking quietly, Why did you help us, Romand? My responsibility is to my home and its protection, he responded. People loyal to what was once Nepal charged me to gather information on Wolfbane and bring it back so we might concoct a plan to bring him down. Then why delay reporting to the resistance by aiding us? Your search for this tower seems of the utmost importance, and to be perfectly frank, I like you both. Sometimes you can cause more good by doing a small thing than in setting out to accomplish a great one. It is these lesser deeds that in the end can affect larger events. This is my goal, a great accomplishment through minor doings. Raymir smiled. What you did for us is not minor. Well, every man breaks his creed once in a while. Raymir laughed softly as they settled into comfortable silence. Roman burrowed down into his blankets and snow, warm from the moment, and fell asleep. Raymir lay awake a while longer, watching the two men about her as they rested. To her it seemed they were but variations on the same core being. Edge slept on, clutching his halberd, and Roman's hand stole to his hilt every minute or so, as if assuring himself it was still there. These dangerous men, wrapped in the tension of ever-present threats to themselves, had proven loyal to her and one another. Even though they still dozed, they radiated a constant awareness, and they seemed oddly suited to this harsh and alien environment. It was not the first time Raymir questioned her purpose among them, but her mind would not allow her to doubt herself for long. Her value was in her faith and spirit, not her physical strength. Her wits would be of help as much as their courage and ferocity. After the battle with the Daemon Wolf, she was still more assured of the fact. Raymir had grown a great deal since the tragic deaths of her family. When she had been faced with her own demise in those moments, she had felt a steel resolve within her she never knew she possessed. In the dungeons of the fortress, defended for centuries by her ancestors, watching her mother wither away to nothingness, she had felt that resolve tempered and hardened further in the suffering she bore and witnessed. Her skulking about the library and secret study of magic had been the first real steps on her new path to becoming a true squall. Her family had always been steadfast and defiant, though until the Nerathians had come, there had been little to set their mind toward combating. Now the lone survivor of the family had tapped into a secret strength, and her tentative dabbling in the arcane would need to become a true study. Raymir could feel, even in her exhaustion, the wellspring of energy she had called upon against the daemon pulsating within her. She might be in the company of dangerous men, but she could see that with enough time and diligence she might be their guardian instead of they hers. In this resolution, Raymir determined to watch over them now as they slept, but the peacefulness of her surroundings and her own weariness conspired against her. Despite her good intentions, Raymir drifted off to sleep again, passing into sweet rest as the snow floated down around her. There was nothing to disturb any of their dreams on this part of the mountain. Surely no living beast could climb so high. Yet not far below, unknown to the travelers, a deadly malice was slowly ascending. Saltillion had rested briefly, and now pulled his thin body up the rock face with bleeding, clawed hands. Each motion brought more blood oozing from beneath his remaining nails, but he continued to climb, his madness deepening with each lurching motion. As he groped along the face of the rock, he muttered to himself, words with no meaning, talking in his own tongue to the creature inside him. Tattered robes billowed up behind him like a funeral cloak, yet he pushed onward. Raymir and her companions were unaware of the danger, still some distance beneath them. The snow fell steadily like a new linen sheet upon their bodies, obscuring them from view. A cold white fog of flakes fell softly, melting in its own time about the circle of their small fire. Despite the cold, the wind, the ever-increasing snow, the flame burned on, its glow keeping them safe from the deepening darkness about them. Below, the night crept upwards behind maddened eyes, and still the adventurers dreamt and caught not the stench of hatred steaming from the stone about them. The great Carcyrus Vendile, soon to be king of Angladeus, sat brooding upon his throne in a terrible rage. He was erect in his new, massively iron-spiked seat, intended to intimidate and overawe those who came to audience with him, staring straight ahead as thoughts raced through his mind. That devil Arvadas, whom he had intended to murder shortly after his imprisonment, had evaded him, all due to a treacherous knight. Foolish soldiers and their concepts of honor. It was what made the kingdom weak. Vendile relaxed his death grip on the arms of his throne and gazed around, the view of his purple wall hangings and decorations of vicious armaments soothing him slightly. He rubbed the stone of his metal pendant and waited for the act to bring some further measure of calm, yet it seemed to have no effect on his agitated mind. Still, this was his palace and his kingdom, and he must remember that. Already Freyn was seeing to the recovery of Arvadas Hawking and his despicable son. They would be captured before the night was over. Vendile was still unsure how they had evaded his guards in the dungeons, but fortunately for them, all the appointed executioners of Arvadas had been killed in his escape. Otherwise, Vendile would have prolonged their demises over several days. The guards loyal to Vendile were at the temples receiving care from the priests for the many wounds they had suffered at the hands of the traitorous men aiding the despicable Renon. One of the rebels had been captured alive, and Vendile was awaiting his arrival so he might learn where Arvadas had fled, and thus corner and slaughter him at last. In the meantime, he had sent out his army to place every citizen under house arrest until the crownless king was captured. Surely he was hiding amid the unwashed masses he so dearly loved. Vendile would put a stop to that soon enough with a more aggressive campaign of suppression and martial law if it became necessary. He was not against sacrificing a few thousand innocents to flush out his hated foe. The doors of the throne room were heaved open and the High Lords responsible for the coup came through. Vendile was keeping Zarinth and Gul'dan under tight house arrest, but with his own guards for their protection. He did not expect them to try anything, but their descendants had reputations for bravery and independent action, something he was not going to allow to develop in the latest heirs of their titles. It was Boehmer and Hlottek that slunk through the doors of his hall, looking both proud and rather nervous. They noted their king's mood and were wary of it, fearing retribution was about to fall on them for the events of the day, of which they knew only the basest information. Both paused some distance from the dais and bowed low, keeping their eyes upon Carcyrus Vendile, and also looking about them for possible assassins, or worse, hidden behind the wall hangings. Brucius Hlottek made a show of brushing off his red and gold robes over his corpulent body before greeting his king. "My lord, how fare you this evening?" Vendile snorted and did not respond. Boehmer, the military man that he was, assumed that his king wanted a report on the situation at hand, and so he launched into one. "My king, we've located the survivor, and are in the process of bringing him to your dread presence, but we had to send him to the priest first in order to refresh his condition." Again Vendile made no response, so Boehmer forged ahead. "We have sealed all the homes in Alderlast per your request and are beginning a search of every store, warehouse, and residence immediately. I assure your majesty we will leave no corner of the city untouched. Any who resist or harbor any rebel will be imprisoned at once." "No," Vendile's voice was soft yet commanding. "Kill them if they show any sign of opposing me. Do not leave behind any voices of dissent. Once enough die, they will no longer attempt to resist my rule." "Very good, my lord, an excellent plan." Hlottek spoke up, nervously rubbing his smooth-shaved head and fondling the knots of his office about his waist. "My lord, I've dispatched priests to the front near the pillars to assure that the army withdraws, since some of their members have appeared unwilling to cooperate with your commands." Boehmer glared at the priest, his already ruddy complexion deepening to crimson. "There'll be no problems with the army. What happened was a minor moment of dissent amid my men." "Minor?" Hlottek scoffed. "The man released Arvadas Hawking. That's anything but minor." "And what have your precious priests done about it? They sit in their white temples of marble and read the day away. Tell me, will you find the location of the traitor in one of your precious books, Brucius?" "Enough!" Vendile stood up before his throne, and tossed back his cloak, staring hard at the men before him. "You have caused plenty of trouble and done no good between the two of you. Why I ever allowed you to enter into this conspiracy with me, I have not the faintest idea. Do not forget I gave you what authority you have now. Were it not for me, Geladan Boehmer, you would still be commanding gruff infantry in a front-forward post. And you, Hlottek, would be with your priests, leading the morning, noontide, and evening calls to Paladinus, not wallowing in your private harem. You owe all of this to me, and yet a former bandit seer has done more good than the two of you combined. I'll no longer tolerate your incompetence. Spread your followers to every corner of my kingdom. Go to every village, every outpost, every squalid shack, and find that bastard Arvadas Hawking. Don't return to me until you have his and every traitor's head on a spear before my palace gates. If he wants to oppose me, I'll make him pay in blood. The streets will run red with it, and then we shall see if the High Lord Hawking is truly as noble as he claims to be." Boehmer and Hlottek bowed low and scurried away to their respective posts without another word. Vendile collapsed into his throne and grasped his pendant before running his now trembling hand through his black hair. The metal chain caught the edge of the heavy crown and knocked it from his head. It tumbled to the floor, where one of the inset rubies cracked and fell from within the circlet. Vendile sat silently, alone in his throne room, staring down upon the broken crown at his feet. This was how Freyan discovered him when he swept past the guards into the room some time later. The former bandit paused, examining the grim sight, then rushed forward to his king and whispered in his ear, "My lord, I brought the surviving traitor here for you to question personally. We believe he and those who fought with him were in league with the knight Rhinon, who betrayed High Lord Boehmer and yourself." Vendile did not respond, but continued to look at the symbol of his power. Then he rose, swept down the dais, and hefted the item. "Not but a chunk of precious metals. It means nothing to me." He hurled it from him at the door of the throne room, where it shattered in 100 pieces. Then he spun on Freyan with a mad light in his eyes. "Bring the foul betrayer to me, so that I might show him what a king is that rules here." Freyan bowed low, concealing his look of distaste when Vendile had hurled the crown, and walked swiftly to the door. He cracked it open, and 3 guards ushered in a bleeding and beaten man, still wearing his heraldry, through the entrance. Vendile bitterly noted that he possessed the red and black colors of Boehmer, though the black boar on his breastplate was battered and misshapen with the beating he'd taken. This man should have been loyal to him and his High Lord. What fools he had to work with. The guards brought the traitor before the throne, and Vendile stood atop the stairs, gazing down on him. Freyan moved slowly beside him and commanded, "Bow to your king, fiend." The disheveled man looked up. His youth surprised Vendile. He could not have been over 18 years of age. He spat blood on the robes of the advisor. "I see a fiend here, but it's not me." The guards drove him to his knees, and Vendile approached, studying him carefully. He picked through his blood-matted hair with a bare hand, then swung it backward, forming a fist, and smashed the man across the face, knocking loose several teeth. "Fool, you're not enough to oppose me. Your little feat has accomplished nothing. Tell me who else among the army conspired with you." The guards released the man, who nearly collapsed, yet he willed himself to remain upright, blood forming a pool at his feet, as it fell in a thick stream from his mouth. He opened his jaw, releasing two of his teeth on the carpet as he did, and looked up at the fearsome king with a crimson smile. "I've done my duty. That's all I desire to say." Vendile roared ferociously and struck the man again, bowling him over onto his back. Freyne intervened quickly. "My lord, do not kill him. He may be our only opportunity to learn where Arvadas has fled." Vendile managed to contain his anger, barely. He rubbed his knuckles in his free hand and spoke. "Tell me where the rebel has gone, and I'll assure you that you die quickly." The guard groaned on the heavy carpet and hefted himself on his hands and knees. He wiped his mouth, found that it did no good, as the blood simply kept flowing from his face, and chuckled again. "I know not where my true king is gone, pretender. However, I can show you where to begin searching." The guard lunged forward, reaching for one of his captor's blades, but his wounds were too many, and he was weary. The loyal henchman sidestepped him and delivered a vicious mailed boot to his face. The rebel's head snapped backwards too abruptly, and he rolled over, eyes staring unseeingly at the ceiling. Vendile watched the body convulse briefly, then snarled and kicked it himself. He whirled on Freyan and paused, thinking better of striking his only competent advisor. "Find me Arvadas Hawking, and get this miserable cur's body out of my palace. Hang him outside the gates as a warning, and when I awaken on the morrow, he'd better be joined by at least a dozen more like him. Go." Vendile stormed out of the throne room through the back door to his private chambers. Freyan regarded the guards and body briefly, then motioned them to move it away. Stepping lightly around the bloody pools in the rug, he moved on to the marble floor and made his way almost disinterestedly from the throne room. Outside, he grabbed a passing commander of Vendile's personal soldiery. "Take your men out into the city. If you find anyone on the streets at this time, ask no questions, seize them, and bring them back here for execution. Everyone you find. Do you understand?" The guard nodded and moved off to do the advisor's bidding. Freyan stood before the iron doors of the new king's hall to make certain that the soldiers went about their business quickly. Then, with a sigh that betrayed his irritation, he turned back to the throne room and tramped past the massive chair to the palace's library doors at the end of the great hall. Tossing his cloak back, the advisor swept inside and quietly slid the lock into place. Arvadas was far from the city by that time. The strange cavern beneath the palace had taken them nearly a mile outside the wall, not far from a nameless outlying hamlet. This was near Lena's home, and yet the tunnel had been quite far from even that, north of Alderlast's wall, in the fringe of the Silverleaf Woods. This section of the woodland, to the north of the main stretch of forest, was considered especially treacherous. Those who ventured too deep into its woods often never returned, and many shepherds and hunters in the area referred to it in fearful whispers, as though the trees themselves could hear them. Despite its reputation, this region of Silverleaf had made for a great natural defense, as it wrapped around the western and southern lands of Angladeus like a dark blanket. The progress of the escaped captives had been slow. Derek had taken Runadin Calavar on his shoulders now, and while he was youthful, he was not as strong as the prince. Varasha was exhausted from his flight to Alderlast and subsequent mad dash to save his father. The eldest son of Arvadas was no longer capable of bearing the High Lord Calavar. Irindian was helping Renan continue to move forward as best he could, but the young knight had lost so much blood he could barely keep himself going. Lena refused to let them stop, however, insisting that they come to her home before nightfall, lest the guards had made it into the outlying towns. Arvadas seemed unconcerned. "It's unlikely they'll expect me outside of Alderlast." "Nevertheless," Irindian advised, "we need to be cautious." So they traveled all through the morning, reaching the edge of the small settlement a few hours before noontide, and circling about it so as to avoid alerting the townspeople. Lena's home was on the northeastern edge, slightly removed from the village proper. They crept up to the back door and were ushered quickly through. They stepped into the cool basement, containing farming implements and broken wagon parts long out of use. Lena urged them to stay there and hurried upstairs to retrieve blankets and other necessities. She returned moments later, and soon they had laid Calavar and Renan upon 2 thick bedrolls and were treating their wounds with the herbs Lena had been able to gather from her stores. Runadin appeared to be better than they had expected, having suffered a few broken ribs and nasty bruises, but there were no severe punctures to his skin, and none of his injuries showed signs of infection. Renan was worse. His wound was deep and swollen, and he was hot from an internal fever that was likely stemming from the thrust he'd taken under the armor. Varasho and Irindian tackled his illness with everything Lena had, mixing every herb Irindian could find amid their supply that had some healing property. While they worked and forced the foul-tasting concoctions down his throat, Arvadas stitched up Renan's side as best he could with needle and thread. The knight floated in and out of consciousness the entire time, but finally he seemed to relax, and his unnatural warmth subsided slightly. At this point, the weary rested. Derek and Graham insisted on posting themselves at the entrances to the basement, but upon Lena's urging, everyone bedded down for the night without a watch. Then she departed, going upstairs to busy herself baking bread to sell to the people of her hometown so her absence would not be noticed, and thus spark curiosity. Indeed, there were many questions from the townspeople for her, but most revolved around what she had heard from Alderlast, since she had told them truthfully the day before she must travel there on an errand. She related nothing more than general rumors of usurpation and rebellion. The village, being loyal to the Hawking house, grumbled and returned unhappily to its former pattern of life. Soon, Lena was able to close up her bakery and seek some brief rest for herself. She awoke late in the evening, hearing movement downstairs, and stole quietly from her small bedroom, carrying a dagger tucked behind her back. Fearing the worst, she glanced around the corner of the stairs and saw a flicker of flames in the stone fireplace at the back of her shop, which also served as her personal dining room. A figure sat rocking gently in her family's oldest chair, staring into the flames. Lena edged forward and realized suddenly that it had not one but two occupants, the second much smaller than the other. She drew a sharp breath and rushed forth in fear, but even then knew it was too late. Arvadas sat in the rocking chair with a young boy, perhaps 4 years, on his lap. He was relating a great tale to the child, the legend of Keldan Kalavar, gesticulating as he spoke of the Knoll campaigns and about the Angladaic allegiance with the orcs of the Dust Plains, and the terrible monsters that came down upon the people of Gailakill like an all-encompassing storm. The young boy was entranced, watching the old man, whom he knew by sight as his king, envisioning the heroic feats of Keldan and his personal hero. Lena stood on the edge of the firelight, her hands covering her mouth as her son listened intently to the tale he knew so well, probably the most famous telling he would ever have the privilege to enjoy. Arvadas paused in the story as he spotted Lena and smiled. The boy followed his gaze, and his face lit up. "Mother!" He rushed forward and hugged her legs, but Lena did not move. The boy looked up at her. "Mother, is everything all right?" Lena stroked his hair gently. "It's late, Logan. Go to bed, and perhaps our king would be kind enough to finish his tale in the morning." "But—" The boy paused and glanced at Arvadas. Arvadas Hawking looked at him sternly. "Mothers come before kings, my boy. Even Keldan Kalavar knew that." The youth jumped in immediate compliance and sprinted upstairs, determined to fall asleep before he hit his straw mattress. Arvadas rose and guided Lena to the chair he had occupied and sat the bewildered woman down, pulling up a stool for himself from behind the bakery counter. He leaned in and, taking her hands in his, met her eyes. "After all that you have done for me, why should you fear that I know you bore a child out of wedlock?" Lena averted her eyes and whispered, "It's not as simple as that." "Then pray tell me, fair lady, how complex is it? Nothing you could tell me would diminish my love for you and the thanks I deeply give for all you've done for me." Lena looked up. Did nothing about the child seem unusual? "He's a boy who loves his adventure tales." Arvadas laughed heartily. "I've yet to meet one who does not." Lena remained silent, and Arvadas grew serious. "Truth be told, I do not know why my meeting this boy has suddenly made you fearful of me. You've saved my life. There's nothing that you can admit to me that would incur my wrath." Lena looked up once more, now with tears in her eyes. "The boy's closer to you than you know. It's not by chance his name was chosen." Arvadas caught her look and paused. Suddenly his eyes widened, his hands dropped from hers. He glanced back at the stairs the boy had fled up, and then at Lena again. Bewildered, he spoke in a whisper. "The child's of my blood." "Your grandson," Lena almost choked as the words came out. "I named him after his father." Arvadas was speechless for a time before asking, "Does Logan know?" The distraught woman could only shake her head. Arvadas looked back at the stairs and spoke as the obvious became clear to him. "He has the same features of my son, the autumn brown hair and the square, firm chin. Logan would listen to the same tales for hours from Graham and I, but always begged for more. I must have told him the tale of Keldan Kalavar 1,000 times over, and now—" he paused. "I've begun to tell it to his son." Lena stood swiftly and paced the room in desperation. "Please," she cried, "do not think badly on Logan because of me. I love him. I always loved him. How has this been kept from me for so long?" Lena ceased her hurried stride and faced the king. "We met years ago, when we were young. He came riding through here with Varasho. They were traveling to the cliffs on the east above the Farwater and stopped for supplies. My mother was still alive then, and she ran the shop. That night, when they took a room at the inn, we met in the center of town beneath the statue of Paladinus. We didn't arrange it. We never even spoke of it. It simply happened." "You were connected without even speaking the words," Arvadas said softly. "I can remember a similar thing occurring with myself and Logan's mother. We met off and on again ever since. Either I visited Alderlast when I could get work as a servant, or when I stayed here we would find each other. Logan would claim he was traveling or go out to go hunting and instead come here. He came in the same way you and the others did today, always careful, always unseen. He did not want you or anyone else to know, lest it harm your reputation." Arvadas digested this before inquiring, "And my grandson?" Lena blushed a deep red. "He knows his father is a knight, but not who he is. The others from the village think he's a boy I adopted from Alderlast. I've helped feed that rumor by allowing Logan to tell him he is the son of a knight who died in battle. He's a smart boy, though. He asks to meet his father often now." "You've kept this great secret from everyone for so long." Lena averted her eyes. "Not from everyone. To deceive you was not difficult. You love Logan unquestioningly and have never doubted his virtue, but his brother, Varasho, is cautious. He watched Logan for a time and learned of our meetings, of the affair. He demanded we put a stop to it, that we end a relationship before you were aware, and Vendile used it to undermine your authority. I had to hide from him the fact I was pregnant, just as I hid it from Logan. When Verascio learned we were lovers, he went mad with fear. He thought that such news, if made public, would ruin your reputation. He also demanded Logan take the right to redeem himself of his sins. Arvadis' eyes widened. His right. That's why my son went to become a paladin. I always doubted his commitment. Logan was satisfied with knighthood. To be a paladin would take him too far away from the people, and they've always been first for him. Arvadis rose and walked forward towards the distraught Lena. What you've done is not wrong, child. Indeed, it gives me more happiness than any news I've heard in many days, to think that I have a grandson. Yet he's illegitimate, tears welled in Lena's eyes, and your son is gone, my would-be husband is not even allowed to be a father, to know he is a father. All that I have done these past few days has been what Logan would have wanted me to do, not what I would have done. My only act of defiance came in my son's name, a point of pride for myself alone. I care not for you, and your royalty, nor your elder son and his tradition and codes. I love Logan, and him alone. He would not allow his relationship with me to drag his beloved father down, even if it meant leaving the woman he cared for. Arvadis pulled Lena's hands from her face and brought her close. What you've told me both lightens and weighs on my heart. I have wanted nothing more in these last years of my reign than to see my people and my family happy, yet to learn my rule has jeopardized the love of two wonderful people and hidden a child of my own flesh from my son and I is more distressing than I can express. I also realize the resentment you must bear for Verascio and for me, but please let that pass. Let us not be hateful of one another any longer, and instead find peace between us, for you're my daughter, Lena, and should be treated as such. At those words the young woman collapsed into convulsing sobs held in Arvadis' arms. The king was somewhat bewildered to be holding a crying woman, but at that moment it was the least alarming event in his life by quite a fair amount. He held her there, shaking, and it felt right. So much wear came off his shoulders to do as simple a thing as comfort another person in need. These were the opportunities a king missed out simply because he was a king. Arvadis found it made him think of his own wife, now long dead, but the pain of the memory was fresh in the feeling. Both heard the cellar door open and footsteps on the heavy wood boards. Verascio stood before them, his face a knot of confusion. Lena released Arvadis. I told him, Verascio. I told him everything. Verascio looked at her in wonder, and then stared at his father and instantly became defensive. I kept his secrets to protect our kingdom. It seems now they matter least, given our situation. Arvadis sighed and went to him. I trained you too well, my son, in the customs of our people. There are some things in this world that go above the law and the code. Our family, your brother, is most certainly one. His behavior violated the honor of our house. I did not send him away merely to protect you, father. I sent him to atone for his sins before Paladinus. Our love was a sin. Verascio returned her look coolly. Love out of wedlock, in the eyes of our priests, is a most grievous offense. Arvadis placed a hand on his son's shoulder. What you did because you felt it was the right thing to do. Let there be nothing more said of it. We're allies here. He turned to Lena. But that is my grandson upstairs, and hitherto he shall be treated as such. Let him know who his family is. Your family is. Father, what you do, however I might feel it is kind and just, will tarnish you and your reign. Then Verascio's eyes widened in understanding. A grandson? Logan and Lena had a child. Your brother does not know about young Logan, Lena said softly. It happened after he left, several years ago. Arvadis stared hard at his son. Right now, my boy, I have no kingdom to rule over and no image to tarnish with Logan's scandal. If it concerns you so much that the Hawking name takes upon itself, perhaps it is you who should journey abroad to seek redemption for the family. I only advise what's most logical, Verascio's anger flared. To take out on Lena and Logan's child is to invite disaster and will provide ripe fodder for rumor and doubt when you reclaim the throne. Arvadis waved his hands calmingly. We will see to those doubts when the time comes. I am already known for my generosity in family matters. I accepted an orc into our house, did I not? I think a grandson out of marriage will be received better than that. Verascio crossed his arms. And what of Logan? He can't attain the power and blessing of Paladinus with such a sin on his conscience. Lena stepped forward. Your brother knows better than you the price he paid. He cares not for the oaths of a paladin. He only went on the right to appease you and prove himself. This quest of his is not one he takes lightly. He wishes to win back your heart, Verascio. Verascio stared at the floor, ashamed. My brother has always had my heart. He looked up at Lena. As have those he loves. She took him gently and embraced him. I know. They separated and Arvadis drew himself up, glancing at both of them. Well, it's certainly been an eventful evening. I'll never claim my latter years waned in excitement. Still, the great task before us lingers, and we must rest so that tomorrow we can plan. I'm not letting Vendile sit atop my throne any longer than I have to. I can't begin to think of the horrors he'll inflict on my people. At those words they retired, Lena to her room, and Verascio and Arvadis to the cellar. There they sat and spoke softly of the past as the shadows danced slowly along the wall. In his mind, Arvadis could see his younger son and his brave orc companion off on some noble adventure, winning the hearts of the people. In the days to come, his father would need to do the same, for in the people lay Arvadis' only hope, of regaining his kingdom. That's chapter 23. Give me a sec. It's still hot in here. So, the one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, in the previous chapter, the scenes that take place in Delmore and the flashbacks that Trem have, what Holly Conrad's tweet today made me think about was that originally the first story that Trem appeared in was a story I wrote my freshman year of high school that takes place entirely at Aves and is actually what all of the frame narratives in each of the books where Trem is being trained by Vakhtyn, that's where that stuff comes from. But I also had written a version of a story that was an attempt to do a darker sort of take on Trem's life by concocting another adventure that he would have been involved in before we get to the main part of the book. That becomes the story where the Gnolls attack the village and Joseph asks for his help, and he is later saved by Joseph when he tries to essentially let himself be killed in the fighting. I still don't know if I like that particular story, though I like what it establishes about Trem, and I think it's necessary for his character. But I did enjoy the fact that reading that section in Delmore, which I must have rewritten along with the flashbacks, at least a dozen different times in different versions, that I could still visualize the things that I wanted to see reading the words. And I have noticed that live reading, I'm spending more time picking apart my own work and less time breezing past it, as I think, like, well, yeah, of course I said what I wanted to say, because why would I not say what I meant to say? And I think that that's, it's nice to go back to, like, I go back to this book, right, the first one, and having live read it, I find that I think, like, well, I think the second one's a lot better. I don't think the first one's bad, but I think that I'm getting better at what I'm doing. And there's two ways to go about that. One of them is to say, well, I should have spent more time in the first book because now the first book is in some way inadequate because I'm a better writer than I was before. But the other way that I think is the healthier way to look at it is to say, well, you only continue to get better by writing, so if the story only keeps getting better, then two goals have been accomplished. You've made something compelling and fun to read, and you've also established that you can improve on whatever it is that you're trying to get better at. And I just wanted to mention that because I think that that's an important thing. It was really easy for me to read some sections of that book and walk away feeling like, man, that was really should have been done better, or I missed a couple of editing errors because the first book was largely edited by myself, my wife, and Wes Covey, who helped me do a lot of this. Whereas the second one, we were able to get professional editing, thankfully. But that stuff's all fixable. I'm going to release a new version of the book that will have a bunch of updates to it, and it'll be fine. I know, people have mentioned that there were typos and errors, but no one's really said that it detracted from their enjoyment of the story, which is good. But I don't want those typos to be there. But that's also okay. It's okay to make imperfect things if it only gets you a little closer to making something better. So that's it for the live read today. I'll pick up 24 tomorrow. Hopefully this will get better and I won't look quite so Quasimodo-esque. But thank you for checking us out. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Legacy Chronicle, and you can find these videos on YouTube under the VultureX21 username, and there is a playlist for the sword on there. Thanks.